Hello everybody, my name is Martijn Lofvers. I'm Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement and Chief Trendwatcher of Supply Chain Media. We're going to start this journey in a minute, the journey to the self-driving supply chain. Very interesting topic. So in half a minute we're going to start now. There are some people popping in and then we'll take it away. So, all right, a lot of people are coming in this live webinar. Good day, everybody. My name is Martijn Lofvers. I'm Chief Trendwatcher of Supply Chain Media and also Editor-in-Chief of the European Supply Chain Quarterly Supply Chain Movement. Good evening in Asia, good afternoon in Europe, and good morning in the Americas. So again, my name is Martijn Lofvers. I will be the moderator of this webinar. With me, I have two speakers. So first of all, Gonzalo Benedit. He's General Manager of EMEA Aera Technology. He's been working since January 2020, but he has years of experience before that, working for Workday and also with a major other software vendor. Gonzalo, welcome.
Hi, Martin. Hi, everybody. Super happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, great. And next, we have Sean Culey. He's fellow and also author of the great book Transition Point. Everybody should read it. And he's also a transformation change agent. So, and he has been working also in the field in supply chain, apart from writing a book, and do a lot of great stuff. Sean, welcome.
Hi, Martin. Good to be here.
Great. So, we have a great audience, a lot of people still popping in, welcome to you all. You're all on mute, but, we want interaction. So you can see the question pane where you see all the questions. Oh, you can ask your questions, already questions coming in. We're gonna ask the questions if it's in line of the conversation we will have with the two other panelists. If not, we'll reserve the questions for later on. This webinar will be recorded, and you can listen it afterwards. And there are some more links. Initially, also we should have Alessandro Luca, CIO of Merck Group, user of Aera technology, and unfortunately he had a board meeting. And in these days, you have these kind of things. But then again, Gonzalo will have the background to discuss this kind of applications of cognitive automation. All right, we're gonna talk about the new normal and how do you get to the future. And you've seen Sean Culey will talk also about disruption and how you deal with it. About Aera Technology, relatively young company, but already doing great stuff. Apart from the investments, as you can see, they have already great customers, doing great projects. And the most part, you see some figures here, is about the low right quadrant, about the skills. How do you create digital assistants, to create augmented and automated decision making? Anything to add about Aera Technology, Gonzalo?
No, well, thanks for Martin for covering that. Yes, so exciting days for us, right? A lot has happened in the last 3 years, and yeah, we were lucky enough to get the trust from some of the largest and most successful companies in the planet to work together in building and validating our technology, our platform, and we're very thankful to companies like Merck, Unilever, and many others for starting this journey as pioneers with us. And yeah, I would say the uniqueness relies precisely on what you said, which is a combination of a cognitive automation platform and the skills. And obviously, we're going to elaborate on that throughout the next 60 minutes.
Yes, right. So these are challenging days, for a lot of companies. And as you can see, the coronavirus is still happening, in some areas more than others. But the main point is now it's getting global, where other disruptions were more local or hitting certain ecosystems, and they were mainly hitting the supply side. And as we see from a study we did in March among 142 manufacturing companies in Europe, you will see that the COVID-19 was both hitting demand and supply. So it's from both sides the supply chains were hit. So that's unique in that sense. So it's not only disruption from the supply side. And another thing is what we've done in June. We did a survey among over 100 manufacturing companies in Europe, and you see all kind of new initiatives to looking forward to do investments in new software. And you see a lot of investments in risk management, especially the more advanced companies are looking at supply chain risk management, real-time transport visibility. Supply chain network design is back again, I would say, and prescriptive analytics, that's something we're going to talk about later this afternoon, and also end-to-end supply chain visibility. Still, sales and operations planning is hot, but it is already hot in the last 5 to 10 years. To me, this whole COVID-19 is like rocket fuel for the transition. So what do you say, Sean?
Yeah, I think that's a term I've used a few times now. It's certainly expediting things like the adoption of e-commerce and the moving away from a lot of sort of physical retail and some of our old style group entertainments into more digital models. But it's to be expected. When I was writing Transition Point, one of the things I had to understand, I didn't at the time, but I needed to understand, the very nature of technological driven progress and why we've advanced so much in the last 250 years, compared to the sort of centuries that went beforehand, when we had lots of chaos but not necessarily huge amounts of progress. And one of the things that came out of this is that technologically driven change is not linear. It's cyclical. It's evolutionary by nature. And I came across this process by a Austrian economist called Joseph Schumpeter, who called it creative destruction. So we have approximately every 50 years a sort of a wave of new techno-economic paradigms that create whole new power sources, new transport mechanisms, new communication mechanisms, and out of that comes a whole host of new industries. But of course, the destructive side is they destroy the old industries and the old jobs and the old skill sets in doing so. And we're now at the sort of tipping point of the S-curve of 6-wave disruption. So we're really at the point where if you think it's been disruptive so far, you kind of haven't seen anything yet, because it's really not starting to take off. And as you said, the coronavirus has just brought forward a lot of transitional changes that were taking place anyway. It probably would have happened over the next 5 years, and it's concentrated them into an incredibly small period of time. So the skills right now that are needed in businesses are, skills of being able to reinvent yourselves, to be creative, to develop supply chains that are more agile and more resilient, and not so much the sort of downswing period that we had before the financial crash, where it was very much around sort of leaning the supply chains, which is when all of the the offshoring happened, and we had very long but very lean supply chains, and it was all about reducing costs. Now, and again, the pandemic has just brought this to the fore, we need supply chains that are much more agile, much more resilient, much more responsive. And as I say, there's a lot of new technologies that have been bubbling under for a large period of time, that ranging from artificial intelligence to robotics to drones to autonomous vehicles. All of these are going to explode into the mainstream.
So how long does this kind of wave last?
The waves, they're getting shorter. They're getting shorter each period by for a number of different reasons, but they're normally about half a century. And so you think of the fifth wave sort of started, the upswing period of the fifth wave was the very late 60s. And you saw all the social disruptions happening in the late 60s, the civil rights movements, the sort of march for equalities that took place there, and also the conflicts that took place at that time. They were just the fifth wave version of what's happening right now. So if you imagine that's the sort of time period that we're looking at. One of the really interesting things I found out through my quite in-depth research around this is that the upswing takes up about 2/3 of the wave. So you spend more time on the creative side than you do on the downswing. So yeah, we've got another decade or so of really disruptive change ahead of us, unfortunately, before it starts to smooth out.
Okay. So what are the drivers behind this transition?
The drivers are, well, I've named this for this wave. I've sort of named it the creative destruction triple whammy, the 6-wave triple whammy. So you've got 3 effective whammies that are taking place at the moment, and they're all pretty disruptive. Whammy number 1 is horizontal convergence, which is across the end-to-end supply chain. All the things that sort of human hands used to do, the automation of sort of physical manual labor, rules-based repetitive tasks, is being automated. And that goes for everything that from picking things out of the ground to putting things on the shelves to even things we haven't really seen a lot of yet, like driving. Whammy number 2 is the one that has most people spooked, and I think we're going to spend most of our time talking about whammy number 2 here, which is the sort of automation of knowledge work. So there's always been this sort of belief, and it seems to be very prevalent in sort of middle-class society, this sort of belief that if my collar is white rather than blue, I'm safe from automation. Well, that's absolutely not the case. In fact, you know, there's a lot of people employed in a lot of industries that do a lot of relatively repetitive but rules-based tasks, data entry tasks, planning, forecasting, these sorts of things, where we're increasingly finding that machines can actually do those better so that we can start to move on to more value-adding tasks. And then whammy number 3 is the sort of convergence of machine minds driving machine hands. So it's the automation of the end-to-end supply chain. And we're about to see this explode over the next 2 to 3 years when 5G becomes ubiquitous and we start to see, you know, these sensors in everything from industrial pipelines all the way through to devices in our, consumable devices in our house, which enables us to connect the consumer Internet of Things and the industrial Internet of Things so that we get sort of real-time sense and respond data from the end-to-end supply chain.
Could you also apply it to self-driving supply chain in a sense of autonomous planning? Is it also
absolutely.
The third one?
Well, that's exactly what the middle brain is, really. It's becoming, you know, we're receiving so much data, so many different data points, so many different variables that effectively, you know, it's becoming too difficult really for humans to make sense of it, and we're too slow. I mean, the reality of the upswing is that, you know, humans are too slow, our forecasting is too inaccurate, our planning is too infrequent, our black swans are too common, human behavior is too irrational, and our expectations, consumer expectations, are too demanding. So we need supply chains that are able to adapt in real time. And as these data inputs are increasing exponentially and machine brain power is improving exponentially, unfortunately for us, Homo sapiens, our human cognitive capability remains relatively static. So yeah, we've got a bit of a conundrum happening.
Yeah, and on the right side, we also are addressing what they call lights out planning. That you need any planners at all, that you can leave it to the applications.
Yeah, I mean, Gonzalo will talk about this with Aera. I mean, Aera, you know, is proving that the capability exists to do the things that we have talked about, which is where we have demand signals within a normal range of deviation. No forecast is ever accurate. And, you know, we have demand patterns that should be, you know, relatively standard. Then why are we looking at those numbers? Why don't we just let the machines do it for us? And when we get deviations, why don't, you know, let the machines recommend what actions to take place? Because they're basically better at storing large amounts of data than that Excel spreadsheet ever could be. So yeah, we're fast moving towards a world of sort of, you know, lights out warehouses, lights out planning, and effectively, to certain cases, a fully automated supply chain.
So Gonzalo, what does this mean for the way of working?
Well, the reality, as Sean was articulating, the reality basically is exposing us to a new norm, a norm where humans seem to be facing and reaching the limits of performance of what they can do. So it's interesting when we speak with many of our customers or prospects. So the pattern is super consistent. The complexity, scale, and pace of decision making in this new digital era really requires a new way of working. And this is basically the main assumption under which Aera was founded. So when customers ask us about, so why Aera, why cognitive automation, is basically to address this, to address the need for a new way of working and to address the need for a completely different approach when it comes to decision making. It's funny. So we're talking. You were referring to, Sean, so the limits of the humans, and it's a customer of us recently was telling me, it's like, well, it's actually humanly insane, impossible to deal with so many signals simultaneously for human beings. They just cannot. They cannot make sense out of all of it, right? And some of the process, well, sadly, seem to be archaic, right? But decision making has to be a lot more frequent, more rapid, more real time. So at Aera, we believe in an evolution under which today we have people doing the work supported by machines. And so we've seen a massive proliferation of tools and analytics and you name it, right? So things trying to help support people better, right? So as they do the work. But we believe there's going to be this transition to a new era where it's going to be actually machines doing the work, but guided by people. Guided by, in this case, by us, and this is going to be, should be able to deliver both automation, but also, and very importantly, augmentation of the work, right? So it's really through that combination. So you can think of Aera as kind of the brain of the enterprise, the brain and memory of the enterprise that would be able to guide you and guide the enterprise through that decision-making process in this new reality, and dealing with all these complexities, taking on the one hand, so the best of humans, the best of people with their cognitive knowledge, but also the best of machines with the power to scale.
You see on the screen on the left side the traditional hierarchy of a company, and on the right side the new way of an ecosystem and tapping into all the kind of knowledge. Do you expect also that the traditional hierarchy of a company will change? Maybe Sean, you can comment on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I talk about this quite a bit. You know, this sort of top-down command and control structure is you know, it's very much downswing, fifth wave, Frederick Winslow Taylor kind of model of scientific management that just doesn't work anymore. And you know, when I see the image that Gonzalo's got on the screen there, I'm reminded sort of you know, of the statement that, you know, Mark Engel's statement that, you know, supply chains are no longer a chain; it's about a circle with the consumer at its heart. And I think that's really where we need to be. The consumer now has choices as to how they engage with you and as an organization. And I in my book, and I talk about, you know, needing a Copernican business revolution. We need to move from a world where we believe the firm is at the center of the universe and the customer circles us, to a world where the customer is at the center of the universe and the firm is able to circle and adapt around the customer, and look at these technologies as ways that enable them to do that. And you simply can't do that if you've got decisions being passed down layer by layer from the top. You have to put actionable insight at the hands of the people in the organization so that they can answer their own questions and make their own decisions, you know, in a responsive enough manner in order to be able to satisfy the consumer's demands.
Yeah. So you have to put the customer in the middle on the right side figure, I would say.
Yes, I would.
Yeah, all right, okay. You know, Gonzalo, could you give us an example of a new way of working, a new model of working?
Yeah, so well, it really applies to multiple different processes, right? And so if we look at again the reality of how we work with our customers, so we try to identify which is the main challenge or opportunity they're trying to address, and basically by focusing on that, so we start by gathering the data, right? So measuring, being able to understand the data, and so give business sense to their data. And try to apply the logic that they are using, but with the full power of the machines, with the full power of technology, and really getting the sense of all different indicators that could come from internal transactional systems or internal or external sources of data. And through that, so again, talk about demand planning, for instance. We're going to gather not just all the history and all the information that's coming from the internal systems, but also signals, demand signals that might come from the market, from the point of sales, right? So from whichever sources of information that you believe might be relevant. So it's critical to have 100% of the data. And then we apply the science. We apply basically the business logic to the process to come up with the recommendations, to understand, to basically be able to, in a very precise way, without human bias, as Sean was alluding before, without without any restrictions or any compromises in terms of the ability to look into all the data in real time, come up with very specific recommendations. Recommendations that can very quickly become actions, right? That would allow you, in this case, to understand what's based on that forecast, right? So what do we need to do about that? So again, it's not just about giving visibility. It's not about more analytics, but it's give you the visibility and action-oriented, actionable data that would allow you to make a business decision based on the predictions.
But when you look at a lot of business software, they are modeled around certain business processes called S&OP or IBP or warehouse management. Whereas if you are talking your environment, you have to look into the current process and what you need. So can you still need the traditional processes, or have to take a different kind of view?
Again, we look at the traditional process in a slightly different way. We believe that the essence of the traditional processes is still valid, right? So being able to find the right balance between supply and demand is more true than ever, right? And will always be. Mm-hmm. But we believe in a different way of running the process. We believe in the importance of making decisions real time, right? So the monthly process, does that really make sense? The replanning, does that really make sense? Versus finding solutions, versus coming up with concrete responses to the challenges you're facing, concrete responses to the opportunities you have, and an actionable responses. So it's kind of a different approach, a lot more action oriented.
Okay, so how do you get there? Gonzalo, so how do you get to?
Yeah, well, it's a journey, right? So this is obviously one of the so typically when we discuss with our prospects and customers, so mostly with prospects, right? So they look at us, they look at our vision of the self-driving enterprise through cognitive automation, and to be totally honest, right? So often, the kind of the feedback is, okay, guys, this is great, but it's kind of futuristic, right? So it's kind of science fiction, right? And look, the way we look at it is, well, yes, it is a disruptive technology, a disruptive approach to delivering value. And that's very true. But the way we do it and the way we deliver value for your business, for the business of these companies, is actually non-disruptive. And it is non-disruptive because it's a journey, right? So everybody starts with a silo approach, right? So that's a reality in many cases, unfortunately, today. So companies operate in silos. So there's limited visibility across a supply chain, across a business, across geographies, business units, you name it. But again, it's a journey where you start by, once you move from there to a harmonized version, where you get the data together, you give business sense to all the data across systems. So companies, some of our customers have maybe 50 different ERPs, and that's just the ERPs, and then transportation solutions, and then analytical solutions, and then in some cases even data lakes. So it's really complex. So we give business sense to that, and we build a harmonized cognitive data layer. And
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was wondering, can you still use your cognitive automation tools even if you have to harmonize your ERP landscape?
Absolutely, and actually we use machine learning technology to do, for instance, data cleansing, right? So this is the beauty of the journey, is that at every single step of the way, you deliver the value, right? So again, it starts with visibility, but typically very often we focus on a few use cases. So basically, you get the brain started and you start building the memory, right? And typically we would focus on a certain region for a certain use case, whether it's procurement, inventory optimization, logistic, whatever the scenario, the use case is most relevant for that customer. And that's where we start the harmonization. Now, the one thing that obviously it's probably going to come by a surprise to many people is that we can do this very fast. We do this, it would typically take us between 6 and 10 weeks to get the cognitive data layer ready, right? And so again, we crawl many different systems, we're able to crawl many different systems, gather the data, business sense, and you get started. And actually you start with recommendations, you identify solutions. and you basically engage in a model of real-time decision making. Now, from there you evolve to a cognitive phase. This is actually a lot more forward-looking, where you already have a brain and you start incorporating new skills, new capabilities to your brain, new dimensions that actually makes your brain smarter. And you continue to build your memory. So the fact that you have a brain that is able to cope with more capabilities, right? So has more skills, and you increase your memory, allows you to be a lot more effective in the decision making. So a lot of companies would take, again, it would take a few months to go to harmonize, then they evolve into cognitive, where they have more skills, a broader scope, a broader coverage of the portfolio, and then they optimize the algorithm to get better and better results. And only then you go into self-driving, where actually what we typically say is you get the hands off the wheel. And it's going to be gradual. It's going to be for certain parts of your business, but you leave the hands off the wheel, because this is when you can truly rely on the system.
So, but still, you are learning to drive with your new tools, and in the end, you get here to a self-driving environment. Yeah, but this look like, you know, I'm here, you know, this look like Siri, but now, hello, I'm Aera. So, Sean, so what do you think of this new world? How far are we off?
Well, you know, there is a range of different adaptations, and it's no different really to when I used to advise people around getting benefits from things like ERP or from some of the other software, like, you know, I used to sit on top of that. It's, you know, it's a journey, not a destination. You know, it's really but you have to get your basics right. You have to build on solid foundations. So the hardest leap always is the leap from sort of functionally siloed organizations into sort of the integrated model, because you're challenging a number of different existing paradigms, not just technical ones. You're challenging cultural issues. You're challenging the way the organization's been structured. You're changing a lot of, you know, the historic metrics that have been established. You're changing the way the processes have been developed. You know, moving from thinking about control at a silo level to thinking about control across an end-to-end supply chain is perhaps the biggest paradigm shift. But once you do that and you realize, you know, that you clean up your data so that you can actually do that, then the ability to make advantages of these technologies to move from being integrated to improvers, and from improvers into innovators, where you're talking about identifying new business models, can come quite rapidly. The danger is if you don't ever make that leap, if you never get on top of your, you know, your master data or your transactional data, and you never actually get to a end-to-end perspective or a value chain perspective, and you're still stuck in, you know, managing procurement, managing supply chain, managing manufacturing, managing silos independently, then you're in danger of being left behind. But as you know, Gonzalo has proven and Aera has proven, for the companies that can make the leap, they can use these technologies pretty rapidly, and that therefore creates, you know, a moment of risk and opportunity for, you know, the competitors. We either jump on board with this and get, you know, and get ourselves a solid foundation where we can take use of this technology, or there's a real danger we could be left behind here.
Yeah, it's a nice analogy with the Tesla self-driving, you know. But the thing is, you know, with Tesla, there are a lot of Teslas driving around, and they get their updates overnight. So every Tesla is updated. Whereas if you have one company, it seems like you have your own Tesla with no backup. You know, that's maybe the danger. So, you know, this looks like a black box. Can you trust it?
Yeah. And you know, the glass box, black box solution is very interesting. I think back to the early days of sort of advanced planning and optimizer. So I remember going back to Australia when I was with sort of design authority on what was the world's biggest SAP implementation at the time, and we were using APO version 2.0, or as I like to call it, the version that didn't work. And using tools like transport planning and vehicle scheduling and global ATP and these sorts of things. And what I realized then is that if people didn't understand how the number was calculated, if they couldn't put their name against that number and understand the calculations, then actually there would be another number on the side that was usually on an Excel spreadsheet that would be the number that was running the business. So it became very obvious to me that actually it doesn't matter how advanced the technology, people needed to understand how it came up with the numbers. Now, that was fifth wave thinking. As we move to the point that Gonzalo made, to a world where we have just simply so much data that if the machine told us how it came up with the numbers, we still wouldn't understand it, because it's just basically got calculating too many different variables on too many different products. And once we realize that actually the numbers that come out of the glass box are pretty much correct anyway, then we're going to be moving more and more towards a sort of black box solution, which basically says, you know, like you said earlier, lights out planning, which is, I know the machine is right. I don't know why it's right or how it got to its calculation, because it's just too complicated for me, but I trust it. And once we reach that point, then we'll start to see, you know, an exponential takeoff, because the sort of the human bottleneck and the human biases will to some extent be left behind.
Yes. Gonzalo, could you give an example? Well, we're now in an era of COVID-19 and things have changed. Could you explain how it works in the supply chain environment?
Yes. So, well, we've been quite busy, right? Like probably everybody here in the call, right? So we've been super busy for the last 3-4 months. It's funny. So I've been working the majority of the time from home, but I feel like I haven't seen my family much, right? So it's been really crazy, and it's funny. So this case is around a customer that has started on the self-driving enterprise journey, so with us a couple of years ago, right? And so they're very well advanced. And Sean, to what you were saying before, it's funny because at some point they said, well, if we don't disrupt ourselves, if we don't jump on this transformation, actually we might face a Kodak moment at some point, right? So they kind of felt that, well, it's either disrupt or be disrupted, right? And so this is a case of this company, a very, very large consumer goods company, and like everybody else, so they got caught by surprise in the beginning of COVID, right? So early March, so they got caught by surprise, and they started seeing disruptions popping up across the whole supply chain on so many different angles, right? So it was disruption around supply limitations, physical disruptions in the factories with the transport, demand profiles changing, right? So very rapidly. Again, all of that combined and happening every single day and always changing. So they came to us and basically kind of asked for help and say, hey, could Aera, could you help us maybe assess the impact of these disruptions so that we can understand what to do and where to focus? And because of the fact that we had the cognitive data layer already built with them, right? So again, we've been working with them, not just on building the platform, but on a number of different skills. We were able to very rapidly build a solution actually in 10 days. Well, it was even less than that, but let's round up upwards. It was 10 days. We built a solution that allowed them to simulate the disruptions across the supply chain. So basically it was understanding where is it that you're going to have a disruption? Is it, for instance, is it a vendor in Italy that's not going to be able to supply a certain raw material? Okay, what's the implication in terms of semi-finished goods, in terms of finished goods? Which are the markets, the customers that are going to be affected, and how is that going to happen? And all of that you were able to simulate. Again, imagine doing this like in covering multiple different scenarios on so many different restrictions and limitations. And again, very quickly, we gave them visibility on what was going on. What was being impacted was which were the implications in terms of the inventory coverage they would have at every level of the supply chain. And basically, again, in very quick, so they were able to understand the true business impact, because in some cases they felt like the impact was overestimated versus underestimated. So it was real, right, in terms of the impact in the top or bottom line. We allow them to focus the resources on the right risks or opportunities, because in some cases it's also generated opportunities and risks. So they kind of put order to the chaos. It was chaos in the early weeks, and so then they put order to that so that they would focus the resources on the right battles. And then the last one that was very interesting was around securing alignment across all the different stakeholders, because what happened in the early days is that everybody would have a different view on what would happen and what to do. And now with this, so again, by looking at all the data across the whole enterprise, they were able to come up with a common, consistent view for everybody in the company.
So
yeah, that was one example, one fascinating example we had the last couple of months.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you had to tap in different kind of systems with TMS, WMS, ERP, possibly SNOP. So different kind of systems are providing the data necessary to get this layer done.
That's exactly right.
Okay. And so how do you distribute this knowledge if you get this inside scenarios? So how do you distribute to all the people involved to make the right decisions?
So we built a number of different dashboards, right? So that were accessible to all the key people that were part of this process and needed to be informed, actually reaching out very, very high into the organization. And yeah, so we built dashboards, and on a daily basis, we're simulating the implications of the disruption throughout every single step in the supply chain across the globe, by the way, because it's.
So there were more problems in the transportation and logistic area. So could you explain more about, what is your approach?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is an example of with another customer, right? In this case, within the chemical industry, right? So this is an extremely large chemicals company that again operates across the globe. And in their case, it was around the shipment management and the life cycle of a sales order from creation to delivery. And it was really lack of visibility and reactivity. They were not able to understand, or not as they did not have the visibility that was required to understand how things were going, and obviously no way they would be able to react on time. And that was affecting their effectiveness in terms of obviously the cost, transportation cost, from fees, additional fees to the additional charges, but most importantly, it was affecting the customer service. And similar here, right? So this was in the last few months. It took us, in this case, it was a lot more complex because we started from scratch by crawling so a number of their transactional systems, so the ERPs, transportation management system, transportation marketplace, right? So a number of different sources, and then a set of additional sets of a number of additional sets of data so that had to be considered again. Because when you make a decision and when Aera makes a recommendation, it really relies on having 100% of the data. So that's what we did. And we were able, again, to anticipate upcoming milestones, identify risk, and even leveraging machine learning, right? So to predict what could happen in the future, and come up with, so the recommendations themselves would actually lead to very specific actions so that you can approach both the carrier and the customers to alert the customer of any change in the delivery of the order. So yeah, significant value obtained. It took us actually less than 3 months to build up. So from the beginning to the end, to build and deliver this skill and have it operational. And yeah, the impact, the value was really around the transportation expenses and the cost, and then most importantly and fundamentally, the level of customer service.
So you're talking also about external data. I have a question from one of the attendees. So have you had any advice to get 360 degrees data and to ensure it's high quality data?
Well, so again, we've done really a combination of both internal and external data. Internally, so incredibly complex landscapes there is one of our customers, a very large one, has more than 50 different instances of ERP across the globe. So we would look into that. So again, we have a very specific technology, what we call our crawlers, that allow us to crawl into the data, and we use machine learning to do part of the data cleansing, as said before. When it comes to external data, there are certain sources on which that are more frequent, right? And so we're very familiar with using some of those sources like Nielsen data and a couple of others. But then it's really a joint work with each of the customers, right? So this is so the first phase of the project is about data harmonization.
Yeah. And another question is, one of the attendees has an issue with the lack of data, or how do you handle real-time data?
Not so sure if I got the question, Martin. How?
So one of the issues we face is lack of data or access to data in real-time fashion. Do you need real-time data?
Well, it's actually a great question. Not always, you know. So it's just data at the right time, and actually that's something we might comment on later, which is around the frequency. In some cases, you don't need like to refresh your data every second, right? So in some cases, once a day, depending on the topic, depending on the use case, once a day is enough. Sometimes it's once every hour or every 50 minutes. And actually, that's something. So to optimize the performance of our technology, and actually show the performance for the customer, this is actually something that we configure when we build the cognitive data layer. So we look for every single source of data. We identify what's the optimal, let's say, refresh frequency of the data, and we work with that. But it's actually very different from one scenario to the other, often from one data source to the other.
Yeah, right. I can imagine. Visibility is now a buzzword. We also saw it from our own software survey. So Sean, could you explain a bit more what kind of visibility do you have, and how do you approach the kind of visibilities?
Sorry, I was on mute for a second.
Yeah.
Visibility. I mean, visibility gets talked about a lot, and I try to explain that. So the challenge is, if we talk about the fifth wave, sort of up to 2008, the fifth wave, the supply chain was seen as a cost to be managed. It was a necessary evil. It wasn't on the C-suite, and really the focus from a organizational perspective was, just ship product as cheaply as possible. And the best supply chain in the world was the one you never heard about. If it was invisible, it was good, which is not great from a supply chain leader's perspective, which meant that you only got attention when things went wrong. But now we've moved into this, especially COVID has just accelerated this again, where we really need to understand the risks and the complexities that we've built into our supply chain to know whether or not it's capable enough to respond when we have abnormal situations like we're going through at the moment. And also brands are being hurt by things like ethical challenges and proving that their supply chain is more sustainable. So you've got a number of internal drivers and external drivers really asking a lot of questions of, where did you get that product from? Where is it right now? When is it going to arrive? When is it going to cut the customer? Where is our inventory? So the supply chain has been elevated in attention in order to be able to start to get the investment that I think it really needs, so that it can become much more visible. Now, what do I mean by visible? And if you can go to the next slide, what I mean is, visibility of the product flow. Obviously, the flow of products throughout the supply chain, the physical geo mapping of where product is coming from and where it's going to. And again, the coronavirus has just sort of amplified why this is necessary, because we take the PPE equipment, for example. A lot of companies, a lot of governments found that they just didn't have control of their supply chain. They couldn't get hold of this product when they needed to. So suddenly, again, visibility of where our products are actually sourced from and where they're actually going has become absolutely critical. And of course, as well as product, there's the information that goes with that, and the security around that information. I talk about in Transition Point about how data has become the fifth currency. It's incredibly valuable, this information, and it's going to explode as the rest of the world joins us on this sort of online journey, because there's only about 47% of the world actually online at the moment. But also as things like the Internet of Things emerge, in the industrial Internet of Things and 5G and facial recognition software becomes ubiquitous, there's a massive amount of data that's going to be captured, and being able to store that, process it, analyze it, understand it, and protect it is going to become incredibly critical. And then finally, of course, the flow of money, the physical transactions. Again, we're going to see in this sixth wave, one of the big challenges is going to be around taxation. We at the moment have global organizations, but national tax rules, and it's being exploited. So the flow of money and the use of cyber currencies for this will be increasingly important as well, and the things like the blockchain, to actually understand where money is. So we need the visibility of all these three types of flows: products and services, information, and money, to say whether or not we've got our supply chain on control. Now, what does that give us? What's the benefits of that? Well, for the industrial Internet of Things and the control around our energy consumption, our water consumption, the ability to peel back the layers of our factories and actually take what is just measured at a macro level and move it down to a micro level, is going to give us real insights as to where our costs and consumption of energy and water and other utilities are. It's going to help us identify the sort of the 8 deadly wastes, as we talk about there, the excess inventory, the stockouts, the excess movements of issues, the defects, all of these sorts of things that we've been trying to identify for years, but struggled because we've been using lots of manual, time-consuming processes. And finally, because it's going to understand where the risks and the issues and the constraints are in our supply chain. Because at the moment, we're only really finding out about a lot of these when we hit a black swan or when we hit an exception, and that's too late. That's just too late. We need to be able to understand where the issues and constraints are before the exception hits, not afterwards. Now, the final benefit is if we do have visibility of the flows and visibility of the costs, then we have visibility also of the impact of this supply chain. And we're constantly talking about the ecological damage being done by the industrialized nations in the way we consume products, but also the way we manufacture products. Things like the Rana Plaza disaster that took place in 2013, where the world realized that the reason they got fashion that was so cheap it was disposable was because there was disposable lives at the end of it. And child slave labor from cobalt mining through to industries like the brick manufacturing industry down in sort of Peru. These ethical challenges need to be addressed because there's more and more attention being focused on it. Also, the ecological side, the plastic that we have in the water, the amount of carbon emissions, the amount of sewagery and waste, we need to be able to control that. That's becoming, again, one of the key supply chain metrics. And finally, for those organizations who are dealing with countries where maybe there's, certainly a lot of money changing hands and there's a lot of attention being paid into things like the arms industry, for example, we need to understand the economic flows so that we can make sure that we're operating at an ethical level economically as well as ethically and ecologically. So, being able to really understand our supply chain, because as I've said many times over the years, you can't control what you don't understand, and you're unable to improve things that you can't control. So understanding, getting that visibility is absolutely key to that process.
So how do you measure it all? So that's the whole point, because there's so much information.
Yes, and we've got to make sense of it, haven't we? We've got to be able to, it's no good just measuring it. We've actually got to be able to understand it.
Yeah. So Gonzalo, can you explain? So how do you deal with all this different kind of data and this fluctuation?
Absolutely, and actually you can actually do the build up of the slide but just for the sake of time, thank you, Martin.
Yeah.
And to what Sean was referring to, I feel like so to us, what's important is to make sure that obviously so companies have full control on the decisions they make, right? So to have control on their supply chain. Again, whether it's if they go on automation or they go back to manual, right? So think about, again, the autopilot versus going back to manual. Well, it's up to companies to decide. So what we see is like for the different phases of the reality of again, a crisis like the one we're going through today, right? So you maybe need to have a different approach, right? So maybe pre-COVID, right? So you were in a situation where it was on autopilot, right? So it was self-driving. So it was basically normal. It's a normal cadence of the business following certain business priorities, certain goals, and then the decisions were made again based on a certain direction. But in reality, like today, where there is a lot of instability, where it's extremely volatile scenario, you can maybe not go into self-driving, into automation. You need to take back the manual control and really have full visibility. You focus more on full visibility and being able to take the decisions, right? Real-time decisions on how to cope with these, for instance, the disruptions I was alluding to, but also build scenarios, right? So build scenarios about, okay, what's the future going to look like? And then step by step take decisions that should hopefully allow you to bring back the stability into the business, the stability into the supply chain. We've seen that happening, and then we too see that there's going to be, again, back an evolution where as we recover, we get out of these very volatile times, you can switch the dial and go back into self-driving enterprise. You have full control. And then if you go to the next one, Martin, the other thing that's obviously, and the next slide, sorry, the one thing, again, I talked about the beginnings of our company. It also has to do with the fact that, as many of you know, and so obviously many studies confirm, the productivity levels have been stagnant probably for the last decade or even more, even after, in many cases, they say after the 2008 crisis. So really the idea of moving to this era where you have machines doing the works guided by people really aims at bending this performance equation, right? Because again, we've realized that in many cases humans have reached the limit. So what we do at Aera, so what we focus on is on delivering the value, delivering very tangible and measurable value. Again, we talked about so many efforts and solutions and analytics that were brought into the system and are maybe not delivering the value that was expected. So typically we would actually, in every single conversation we have with our prospects and customers, we focus on decision making, and we look into these 5 dimensions around decision making. How accurate are decisions? Are we making decisions at the right frequency, at the right granularity level? Is there something we can automate? Can we rely more and more on machines versus humans? Are we covering the full portfolio of services? And again, if you combine the beauty of moving to this new era where you have machines doing the work, is actually you in a way eliminate those compromises. Now there's no need to compromise, actually, because again you have the full power of the machines to do the work and support you. So again, we do focus on delivering the value, again, from both at the individual level of each decision, but then how is it that overall decisions are being made in a company?
Yeah, but the question is, how do we leapfrog? Because how do you know where to start and how to expand?
Yeah, well, again, there's different approaches, and maybe again, probably the next slides can address part of that question, Martijn, which is the business reality across many companies, at least many of the companies we deal with on a very regular, almost daily basis, is common, right? So if you look at the number of disparate systems they have across the globe, whether it's ERP, CRM, transportation system, again, data lakes, you name it, it's super complex. They realize, so there is a big pressure on innovation, but then it's hard sometimes for them to find the balance between the long-term transformation and the innovation. Right? So many companies that we speak to are going through maybe these long-term, multi-year transformational programs, upgrading their systems. And while that is important, that's maybe in some cases consuming too many resources and preventing them from jumping onto the innovation, right? So being a lot more disruptive with innovation. And I think, again, what we typically suggest and recommend our prospects and customers to look into is an approach where with Aera, you would pick 1 or 2 of your most important challenges, right? And focus on that. Focus on very rapidly validating the platform, validating the power of the technology, and delivering the value. And the beauty of the model of the platform is that it's a platform that is totally scalable and can scale in terms of volume, in terms of business divisions, right? In terms of product lines. So whatever you need, the platform is built to scale. And again, this is what we've seen traditionally with customers. Say, hey, pick 1, 2, 3 of your biggest challenges, of your biggest problems, and we would focus in a few months, and sometimes even weeks, we can take you through the journey of addressing that and delivering the value. And then beyond that, it's basically it's a platform that is self-serving and it's totally compatible with the rest of your landscape. So you don't necessarily need to upgrade your systems. You can, again, for those of you familiar with the concept of the system of intelligence, basically it's a system of intelligence that goes on top of your transactional landscape of your existing stack, and would allow us to, again, to start the cognitive automation journey.
I have an interesting
Does that answer the question, Martijn?
Yes, but I had another question here, relating to something an attendee is asking. Does Aera work in a scenario where you don't have 100% of the data?
We do, and but it's important to understand. So there are scenarios where we and actually it's discussions with customers where we realize that we don't have 100% of the data, but by knowing that, so we look into, again, can we cover for that in one way or another, or at least ahead of the coming up with the recommendations, we realize that there's going to be certain limitations to the recommendations we're able to make. But yes, it's really a scenario. Now, if for the decision to be optimal, it's truly important to, as much as possible, get all the right. And it's when I mean 100% of the data, what I'm talking about, what we're talking about is the data that is relevant to make the decision. It doesn't mean that you need all the data. Actually, if you look at the transactional systems we crawl, we only pick a set of data. And this is what we pick is what's actually relevant to make a certain decision.
All right. You know, we're you know, almost out of time. So you know, there are some questions. You know what William Gibson said: the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. You know, the addresses. You know, think big, start small, scale up fast. I don't know who said that, but this quote also refers to, you know, on one hand what you also mentioned, Sean. There's a matter of hope and fear in all at the same time, don't you think so, Sean?
Yeah. Yeah,
right,
no, absolutely. I think, you know,
go ahead.
No, I was just to say, I think it is a moment of hope and fear. You know, this, you know, hopefully this puts enough fire under people to, you know, to create a sense of urgency that, you know, we need to take advantage of this, but also that, you know, this technology now can, you know, handle some of these new data volumes and take away some of the non-value adding activities that consume so much time and attention, so that people can redirect their efforts to delivering much more customer value rather than just feeding the beast that is their transactional system.
Yeah, right. We have some questions here. You know, I have a question from Gonzalo. What does this journey do to the skills of the future supply chain professionals? Gonzalo?
So yes, so let me hope. So what you're saying? So what does the journey just in terms of how to the skills evolve throughout the journey?
Yes.
Would that be the question? Yes. So again, you can think of Aera as the brain, right? So the enterprise brain, and basically so the skills are the specific capabilities, or we also call them the kind of the digital agents that would work hand in hand with your people. And as I said, so typically we start by identifying a couple of use cases, a couple of skills that would be most relevant to that certain customer. And very quickly, very rapidly, we identify, so we built a few skills. And actually, after we put a few skills into production, so what we built, again, in full coordination with the customer, is a roadmap of skills. And a roadmap of skills under which typically it's a combination of skills that are actually you can consume out of a, let's say, the Aera library, right? So it's pre-packaged, what we call pre-packaged skills. So whether it's procurement, inventory management, forecasting, so again, a number of scenarios that we've tested enough times, right? And so we have proven with many customers, or build and a combination of skills that actually you're going to build that might be very specific to your business, to your company. So it's really, you can again think about the brain adding more and more capabilities that would make you, well, a lot smarter.
Okay. Another question, actually two questions relating to investments in this kind of technology. So what is the average cost of a 6-month journey for a multinational on one hand? And maybe you can also answer the question, you know, can you give a sense of a magnitude of the business value delivered in a large enterprise by implementing an Aera solution?
Yeah, well, in terms of the pricing, I think it would be, it really depends on the size of the company. And so actually, so we talk about the size of the brain, right? And so it really would depend on the data volumes to be managed, on the skills that you need to add on top. So it's really very viable, right? And it's customer by customer. It is very flexible, right? So it's we take our approach is a monthly subscription, so it's very easy. Again, we intend to be as easy to do business with as possible. So it's extremely flexible.
All right.
Then,
yeah, go ahead.
No, just on the value again. The beauty is that it's very tangible value, right? So we measure every single recommendation, and where we see often it's honestly it's millions of dollars. So recently, I remember, so we had cannot disclose any details, but so just a single recommendation was having an impact of millions of dollars in the bottom line to a customer. And imagine, so often there's hundreds of them every day. So often it's obviously not as much. Often it's in the thousands of euros, like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of euros per recommendation, as impact in the contribution or in the top line, again, depending on what is it that you're measuring.
Yeah, and I know that Alessandro De Luca from Merck said, in the last years implementing this, they gained 3% plus in revenue. So that's major. Actually, you were almost out of time. So there are some questions, but I suggest that you will follow up individually, because it takes a lot of time and there's so much to talk about this. But I would like to finalize by asking you, what is your one call to action, Gonzalo, to the audience?
Well, first of all, thanks for joining, right? So thanks to everybody for joining, and Martijn, thanks for having us. We're super excited. And look, if I would say one thing, it's like, give us the biggest challenge on which we can be of help, right? And get started with the journey, right? So typically that's something we've tested with many companies. It's like, be nimble, be agile, right? So pick the biggest challenge, focus on that, deliver the value, and then as it's aligned with the vision, and then you take it from there.
Yeah. Sean, what's your final one call to action?
Oh gosh, I mean, I tend to usually finish all my presentations with, I don't know how arrogant this is, but I usually use a quote from my own book, which says, given what you know now about how your customers behave and what technology is capable of, would you design your business to look the way it currently exists, or would you design it differently? And if the answer would be, well, actually, I would design it differently to take advantage of these new changes in customer behavior and this new change in technology, then really, the question is, you better get on and do it before someone else that takes advantage of those opportunities before you do, because doing nothing is not an option.
Yeah, right. So on my side, I have a call to action. Do know what your strategic direction is. Do you want to focus on process innovation, operational excellence, product innovation, product leadership, or service innovation? So do know what is your strategic direction and focus on that. With this, I would like to end this webinar. A lot of questions, but we'll have to do another one, I think. Gonzalo, thank you for your explanation. It was great. And Sean, also thank you for your inspiring thoughts as ever.
Thank you.
And I would love to see more about what's happening in the cognitive automation environment. So Gonzalo, keep us informed. And with that, I would like to thank all the attendees for keep on listening and starting the questions even more than we can chew, I would say. But the future is ahead of us, and we should do this kind of thing more often, I would say. So thanks to you all, and thank you for your participation. This is recorded, so you can listen back or re-forward it to someone else, to your colleagues. And you will also be able to browse through the slides again. And of course, you can go to Aera Technology, and there's contact details. And you can contact me or Sean Culey for more inspiration and more thoughts. So thank you for this, and see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Martijn.
Thank you all.
All right.